You're watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. Joining us from Washington is Michael Kugelman. He's the Deputy Director of the Asia Program, as well as a Senior Associate for South Asia with the Wilson Center. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Kugelman.
Thanks. Great to be here with you.
Just wanted to get a sense from you of what you thought. It may be coincidental, it may have been routine, the dates may have been fixed before, but the Hainan foreign ministerial meeting, the strategic dialogue between Shah Mehmood Qureshi and Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, coming just on the heels of the Army Chief General Qamar Bajwa and the ISI DG General Faiz Hamid going to Saudi Arabia soon after what Mr. Qureshi said. Uh, is it important in any manner?
Well, I think the timing of this visit by the Pakistani foreign minister to China is very significant. I mean, as you know, these types of visits are routine. I mean, Pakistan and
Sure.
China have a very close relationship. You always have these high level visits both ways. But I do think this one is significant because, indeed, as you suggest, it comes on the heels of this very consequential spat between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has long been one of Pakistan's top allies and most dependable allies in terms of one that provides support, including financial support. And so the fact that you have the foreign minister Qureshi heading over to China now, it suggests to me a need to essentially get reassurance that China remains committed to providing support to Pakistan. And I would not be surprised if there had been a very specific ask or request from Qureshi for more support, given that Saudi Arabia, indications suggest that Saudi Arabia has been asking Pakistan to pay back the loan, part of a loan, more quickly than expected. And I think also there's just a lot of geopolitical dynamics that are in flux right now in the broader region. It's very interesting that you have this recent deal between China and Iran,
Yeah.
which has sort of led to speculation that there could be efforts to bring Iran into the CPEC. So maybe that was discussed too. So yeah, I think the timing was very significant.
Yeah, and as you're pointing out there, Saudi Arabia, the report suggests that it had asked for a repayment of 1 billion of that 3 billion and had put on hold the oil credit as well. And reportedly, China had stepped in with that payment. Now, will China be looking for its own pound of flesh in that dynamic?
Well, there certainly is a possibility. I think it's important to emphasize that China does not provide support to Pakistan as an act of charity. It always does. It does so only when it feels that it's important for its own interest. There have been times in the past when senior Pakistani leaders have gone to China to request financial support and they are turned down. I mean, that has happened before. But I think that China understands that Pakistan is important for China as Beijing tries to bring more momentum to the broader Belt and Road initiative. And Pakistan, of course, has always been seen by Beijing as an important, really as a linchpin for BRI, just because CPEC is probably the most operationalized component of BRI. So I think China wants to do what it can to strengthen Pakistan and do what's needed to ensure that Pakistan is in a position to absorb the costs of CPEC, and more broadly wants to make sure that Pakistan has what it needs to try to get to the recovery period post-pandemic, because it has an economic crisis that has been quite serious even before the coronavirus pandemic set in.
So, Mr. Kugelman, would the right word be ironic? I mean, in the sense, Shah Mahmood Qureshi's statements on Saudi Arabia and the OIC, Jammu and Kashmir was what triggered off the spat. And subsequently, the joint communique with China in the strategic partnership between those two leaders has support, Pakistani support for what not only Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, but also the Uyghur or the Xinjiang issue.
Yes, I mean, I was very struck by that statement. I mean, as you know, the Pakistani government position for some time has been that it doesn't really publicly discuss the Uyghur issue. It discusses it internally. And yet all of a sudden you have this very public statement where Pakistan, quote unquote, reaffirms its support for, China's position on these issues. And I think it certainly accentuates an irony that many Pakistanis would not want to hear, that the Pakistani government is always amplifying the plight, understandably so, of Palestinians, of Kashmiri Muslims. But when it comes to Uyghur Muslims, total radio silence, except now all of a sudden you have what appears to be complete support for China's position. But I think another important issue here is the Kashmir issue. Indeed, as you note, the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan spat came about because Pakistan believes Saudi Arabia wasn't doing enough to support Kashmir. China is really one of the only countries right now that has been willing to provide full support to Pakistan in Pakistan's position on the Kashmir issue. And of course, that's in no small part because China opposed India's moves back on August 5, 2019.
Well, those moves, like you're saying, even internationally, were reflected in the United Nations Security Council, where China brought it up at the behest of Pakistan at least thrice this year itself. But since it was behind closed doors, there was no statement as such. So India sees that as a diplomatic victory, at least at the UNSC.
Right, well, as it should be. I mean, indeed, there have been several meetings that China arranged at the UNSC on Kashmir, but indeed, I mean, nothing really came of that. And I think that's been really the main storyline for this for what's happened over the last year in terms of Pakistan's own efforts to really get Kashmir on the global agenda. And this is not new; it's been doing this for many years, but it really amplified, accelerated that effort over the last year. And other than getting significant support from China and some positive words from the likes of Turkey and Iran and Malaysia, there hasn't really been that much else. And that's why I think Pakistan is going to have to rethink that strategy because it seems to have had limited successes so far.
You mentioned CPEC and how that had been reiterated in the communique as well. And there was a lot of words about the speeding up or the implementation of those projects since they've been hanging fire for so long. And you mentioned Iran earlier as well. So how do you see China's reported 400 billion 25-year-year strategic partnership with Iran and CPEC? Is that a continuation of the BRI, or is that a parallel route in case something goes wrong?
Well, it's interesting that for quite some time, both Pakistan and China have indicated that they would like to bring more countries into the CPEC fold, not BRI more broadly, but the CPEC fold. And there are certain countries that have been sort of brought up repeatedly over the last few years. One of them is Turkey. Iran has been another one. And indeed, I would assume that perhaps one of the goals of this China-Iran deal, not one of the main goals, one of the secondary goals, is to figure out a way to bring Iran into the CPEC overlay. I think that's quite clear, and I imagine that may have been discussed in Qureshi's meetings with his counterparts in China. I think that certainly is a possibility. And it's important to remember here that CPEC had been scuffling a bit, it had been struggling a bit. There had been some times in recent months when there were indications that Pakistan was reluctant to take on more loans because of its financial problems. You then had a very rare rebuke from a senior U.S. government official of CPEC when Ambassador Alice Wells at the Wilson Center last November was very critical of it. I think that was essentially the Trump administration bringing Pakistan into the U.S.-China rivalry. But I think after that rare rebuke from the U.S. government, that was really a spark for both Pakistan and China to really accentuate that CPEC is still very real, and they're not going to bring it down because of what a senior U.S. government official has to say. And even before the pandemic set in, both Pakistan and China were announcing the second phase of CPEC, essentially trying to bring more momentum to it. And I think that what we're going to see now is more efforts by both Beijing and Islamabad to telegraph a message that CPEC is very much a real thing, and it's sustainable, and it's going to succeed.
When you look at what's been happening in the geopolitical sphere in terms of China, now a lot of pushback worldwide, whether it's military, say, exercises that various countries are having, U.S. arms sales, Taiwan to Japan, whether it's on the economic sphere, trade sanctions by the U.S., whether it's just rhetoric, political rhetoric as well. In terms of that, how do you see the whole dynamic of China and Pakistan, and how India has been preparing now for decades for the possibility of having to face a two-front hot war?
Well, it's true that there's a lot going on here, and I do think it's significant that China is facing a lot of resistance, including from countries that hadn't previously been as overtly critical, just because of this wolf warrior diplomacy in which Beijing has been pursuing its foreign policy and strategic goals with more muscle. And we see that not just in terms of what's happened in Ladakh, but also its moves in the South China Sea and Hong Kong and so on. But I think that for Pakistan, that gives it even more of a reason to do what to accentuate its close relationship with China. It's important for Islamabad to demonstrate to China that it's always going to have a friend when it comes to Pakistan. And of course, I'd argue that Pakistan needs China more than China needs Pakistan, but they both do need each other, and especially now as China tries to continue with its BRI initiative. But I think there's still a lot in flux geopolitically right now. People talk about this emerging Cold War between the U.S. and China. I wouldn't go that far. I think that there has been indeed a lot more criticism and resistance to what China is doing around the world. But at the end of the day, I think that many key players, from those in Europe to those in Southeast Asia, they may worry about China from a military strategic lens, but economically, they still see Beijing as a key market that they want to do business with. And so I think that you have a lot of countries that are on the fence. Some are genuinely concerned about what China is up to, but others want to keep doing business with it. And I think that the U.S. and India are perhaps exceptions in that they're trying to push back hard on all levels. But I think there's still a lot of. I think we need to look at this broader global scenario with a lot of nuance when it comes to this U.S.-China rivalry.
So talking about nuance, Michael Kugelman, thank you so much for your nuance and insight. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And a reminder to our viewers, just log on to our website, stratnewsglobal.com, to get all the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. Do follow us on our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And just click on that bell icon on our YouTube channel if you want to get reminders before we put up videos like this one. You've been watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.